Hey guys, this is Sade from Shady Saves the Day, and today I have a review of these Mijello Fusion palettes. My old gouache palette was the Mijello 18 Well Fusion palette. You can see that it is very well loved, just completely full of Winsor & Newton colors and some colors that I made myself from a mixture of those, and it is super dirty and just a mess. And I was able to get for Christmas this new 33 Well Fusion palette. It's the same style, but it's got a lot more room and it has so many mixing spaces. It's got that one, a removable one, and then underneath the wells, there's this one, but it was really hard to open it. In the end, what I ended up doing was adding stickers with washi tape so I can just pull it out, and that worked really well. I would suggest doing that if you have some trouble pulling out the wells. So I had to fill this up, and in order to fill it up, I had to organize the way I like to organize, which is from yellow all the way down to green. And I put the browns where I feel like they fit in between the yellows and reds, because normally they're just a desaturated orange or red or something like that. So I have a lot more paints than I used to, so that's also part of why I needed this new bigger palette. So it's a combination of M-gram gouache and these, obviously, once again, very well-loved Winsor & Newton gouaches, which I'm almost out of most of the colors. So I'm just trying to figure out what order they should go in, first with the M-grams and then with the Winsor & Newton. And then I'm going to try to put them all together. I'm trying to figure out where the Winsor & Newton colors fit in between the M-gram ones so that I can have a nice range. The reason why I like to arrange like this is because it makes it a lot easier for me to mix, because then I don't really have to think about, oh, okay, which red should I mix for a really bright purple? Well, I have the red and the blue right next to one another, so it's very easy to tell. So now I'm lining them up how I want to put them in the palette so that I don't get confused. And unfortunately, the thing that I don't like about these sort of palettes is that I can't move stuff around, but I'm just trying as much as I can to give myself some space. I had to use a little key to get the extra color out of these Winsor & Newton ones. Probably I'd like to get one of those tube ringers in the future because that's a lot easier than using these keys. For the Winsor & Newton colors, since I know that they crack, I'm adding, I think, just 3 drops of glycerin to each of them, and that ended up working really well. They stay really nice and reactivate really nicely without being too sticky. Before I added honey and glycerin, and I think that ended up making a little bit too much humectants in the mix, and it didn't really work very well as gouache, but just using the glycerin is good. So in the top row, I just have my yellows to oranges, and in the next row, I have my reds to purples. I had a couple of problems with the reds because I thought certain ones were warm reds and certain ones were cold reds, so you're gonna see me moving stuff over and scooping it up and putting it in a different spot like I did here. Making a big old mess. Tip, if you're having trouble opening the lids, you can use a cloth or something, and that normally helps. Once again, just had to scoop that right out because it was not the right color. And that is why you swatch before you do these things, guys. I'm using a little clay tool that I sometimes use for mixing, especially with gouache, so that I don't mess up my brushes. That way I could get that last little bit of the paint out of the tube. While I was filling this up, I ended up finishing a lot of my Winsor & Newton tubes. This tube is so old. I think it's probably 20 years old. I don't know. That was actually quite difficult to get the gouache out of. but it's such a pretty color, that Bengal rose. So now I'm going to do my blues to my greens. Pretty normal colors: ultramarine, phthalo blue, permanent green, phthalo green. I did them like this, not all together, so that I could have space for more colors on the side. Since I can't move around the colors in this kind of system, I wanted to be able to at least have color families together, so I have space to put more yellows and more reds and more blues. All of this mixing ended up making like a huge mess. I have like paint all over my hands and all over all of my cloths and everything. And I decided to put the white in a corner. I have both zinc and titanium white. Titanium white is much more opaque and it will kind of dull down your colors a lot quicker. But if you want a good mixing white that's not as opaque, zinc white is really good. So if I'm just trying to lighten my colors a little bit, but not just make it, you know, entirely pastel-y or desaturated, zinc white is what I go for. And if I'm just trying to make it pastel-y really quick, go for titanium white. So this is everything all together. And now I'm just going to swatch out my new palette. So first is Winsor & Newton's Hanhemühle made with PY3. You can see that it is only semi-opaque. It doesn't completely cover the black. Next is PY151 Gouache. This one is an M-gram color. This one is also only semi-opaque. It makes a nice peachy color when you mix it with the white. PY65 Primary Yellow Deep from Winsor & Newton. It's a bit more opaque than the Hanhemühle and the Gouache. Still not completely opaque. PY42 Yellow Ochre. This is completely and totally opaque. That's just completely covering the black and the line. I really like this color, but it's kind of useful for using skin tones I prefer. The next color, the Raw Sienna, this one is a bit warmer. It's also totally opaque. This one is from M-gram. M-gram's Burnt Sienna is quite nice. When you mix it with white, it gives this kind of like warm, fleshy color. I like it a lot. It is also totally opaque. PR122 Napthal Red. This is from M-gram and it's semi-opaque. It makes a really cute pink, like a baby pink, not like a hot pink, because this is a warmer red, so those don't generally make a nice hot pink for you. Then you have Spectrum Red. This one is from Winsor & Newton. It's PPR25 and PR170. I don't really know why, but it's totally opaque, so there's that. There's Primary Red from Winsor & Newton, PR170. This is like very pinky. It's almost totally opaque, just a little bit transparent, and it makes a nice pink color. PV19 Quin Rose from M-gram. This one is pretty transparent for a gouache, and I mean that's because it's PV19. Some people don't like that, but I'd prefer to add my own white later if I want to. There's Bengal Rose, that vintage paint, and it is like, I know this is basically the same as Opera Rose, but for some reason it feels like a little more deep. I like it. I feel like I'd wear this color in a lipstick. PV19 Quin Violet by M-gram. This one is similar to the Quin Rose. It's the same pigment, so it's also kind of transparent. It's a really deep purple. In order to get the purple out of it, you have to add white, for sure. PV29 Ultramarine Blue by M-gram. This is actually a really nice ultramarine. It's also quite opaque, and it makes like a nice sky blue when you add white to it. PB15 Primary Blue by Winsor & Newton. This is also very opaque. I feel like this is very opaque and light for a phthalo color. Normally those colors are very transparent, but it makes a nice sky blue. It's supposed to be the same pigment as the next one, Phthalo Blue by M. Graham. You can see that one is quite transparent and really dark. In order to get the same shade as the Winsor Newton, you have to add a decent amount of white. Permanent Green Middle by Winsor Newton, that's PY3, PY74, and PG7. It's a regular green. I almost never use this color. It's not really useful. I'm not like a fan of mixed greens, but it's there. PG7 Phthalo Green by M. Graham. This color is really useful. I mean, it's phthalo green. You know what you can use it for. You can mix it with reds, you can lighten it, you can do a lot of stuff with it. It's a signal pigment color and it's transparent. PW6 Titanium White. You can see this is much more opaque and it makes a nice gray. PW5 Zinc White by Winsor Newton. This one is obviously a lot less opaque. And then Ivory Black, which is just a black. I also did a dispersion test, but you can probably tell that it's not as big of a deal for gouache. The only colors I think that dispersed a ton were the phthalo colors and the quinacridone colors, because that's just how they do. So this is overall what all the colors look like. And I decided to do a little portrait of a little girl to test out the new palette. To be honest, I'm not so happy with how this turned out. If you've been following me on Instagram, you can tell that I've improved a lot in my portrait painting. But I really enjoyed using this palette because it was a lot easier to have a lot more space to mix up colors. In the other palette, I was constantly just mixing colors together and they were getting super muddy. But in this one, if I wanted more space, I can open up one of the 3 huge areas, or I can clean off a space. I have one of the mixing spaces dedicated to using the Zorn palette and mixing black and white. So that makes making portraits a lot easier. And having all of this mixing space also just made it easier to learn how to paint with gouache better. I think it's kind of like in oils, you kind of mix the colors next to one another on the palette. So if you have like a very big square space, that makes it easier. Personally, I don't really feel like I need to have a huge space for mixing with watercolor. I don't really have like tons of puddles and then take for a little bit from one and then another. But with gouache, I feel like that's a lot more useful because then it's really easy to get those in-between shades, which you really have to nail because you can't just blend as easily once you get it on the page. You don't really have to nail it so much with watercolor. You can just keep layering and adjusting until you get it. Of course, the nice thing about gouache is that you can always paint right over something. So you can do light over dark or dark over light and keep going until you figure out something that you like. end, I would definitely really recommend this palette. Obviously, it's not a travel palette. It's going to take up a lot of space on your desk or wherever, especially if you have the extra palettes out. But I think that it's super duper convenient, and it stops you from having to constantly clean your palette, and it gives you a lot of space to mix in. The only thing that I think would make it even better for gouache, at least, is if the wells were deeper and more like a square container instead of like your standard well. Because then you can mix up a large amount of pigment and they wouldn't be kind of splashing over to one another. Sometimes I had that happen and they got contaminated. It's not that big of a deal with gouache, but it's still kind of annoying. Also, since with gouache you don't have as much of a problem with the paint beading up on the palette, I didn't mind that it's plastic. I'm really not a big fan of plastic palettes for watercolor because of that issue, but for gouache it worked perfect. Of course, I'm gonna keep the smaller palette around. I haven't really used it since I got the bigger palette. But I'm going to keep it around and maybe make a sort of travel palette or something else with it. I'm not really sure yet. So this was just a really simple review and overview of how I put my colors together for this palette, and I hope that it was helpful to you guys to just see how I kind of do it. I'm still learning a lot more about gouache, as I think a lot of people are right now, and I'm having a ton of fun with it. So I really hope that this was helpful. Thank you to my Patreons who are helping me to make these videos. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!